everyone. I'm so excited to have you here for another episode of Right Off Track. And today I have another wonderful guest with me, and I'm so excited to speak with her because I've known her for a while. I've seen her grow professionally so much, and I'm so grateful to hear more about her journey and talk about important topics along the way. So welcome to the podcast, Julie Taheri. Did I say that right? Beautiful. An esteemed expert in talent acquisition and a passionate entrepreneur. With a wealth of experience in building and leading high-performing teams, Julie has made significant contributions to the field. Julie's journey began in the recruiting industry, where she held technical positions at top companies like Microsoft, Google, Meta, Dropbox, and Vanta. Might be butchering that. Drawing from her extensive expertise in sourcing, headcount planning, and recruitment, Julie now serves as a co-founder and CEO of Traiga. Beautiful. A pioneering organization that revolutionized the field of talent acquisition and headcount planning. In addition to her professional accomplishments, Julie is an inspiring example of a mompreneur who excels in her work while also being transparent about the challenges of balancing it all. As a female entrepreneur, she empowers others and advocates for inclusive and diverse leadership, recognizing the transformative power it holds for organizations. Join us today as we delve into Julie's inspiring journey from her extensive expertise in talent acquisition to her current role as a CEO and co-founder, and the challenges and triumphs of being an entrepreneur while balancing family life. So get ready for an insightful conversation filled with valuable insights and practical advice. Welcome to the podcast, Julie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Anya. I appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation.
I'm super happy. And just for a little of context behind the scenes, Julie and I don't know if you remember this, but way back in the day when I was first interested to join Meta, there was a happy hour that was happening at Meta. And first of all, I was beyond thrilled to be invited because at that point it seemed like, oh, well, Meta is for those people. And here I am. And you were somebody that was so, I would say like you were helpful. You were somebody who I instantly connected with, right? And I know I ended up going to a different team just because I connected with them opportunistically before that, but you were like the person that's like, oh my gosh, I'd love to work with Julie. So thank you so much for being that person for me from the beginning. I'm so glad we stayed in touch, and I'm excited to hear all about your journey so far. So would love to dive right in there and hear like, what have you been up to lately, and how did that process all begin?
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, yes, I do remember that. I had actually moved into a formal leadership role shortly before that, only actually. But it was one of those things that I had kind of not intentionally not pursued, and begrudgingly acknowledged that maybe it would be a good idea to try it out, and definitely found my footing where I realized that I operate much more naturally in a leadership role than I actually did as an IC. And it's because it just made sense. And the way leadership works, and being able to really, from my leadership philosophy anyways, being able to really lead as a coach and not dictate, but actually help people get to where they could get to, as opposed to telling them what I wanted from them, became very, very integral to my leadership approach, and has always been that way. And so as part of that, it's interesting where you're leading, but as you are deeply aware in the talent acquisition side, it's a function that is supporting the business growth, whether it's aggressive growth or lack of growth, one way or another, but it's relayed information to the talent acquisition team. And by the time the TA organization gets that information from a headcount planning perspective, you end up with some serious challenges. A handful of them, just off the top of my head. One of them is, by the time that the TA team gets the headcount that's been signed off on, the hiring managers are already planning on having that talent, and we haven't even started recruiting for them yet. And so that's, one of those problems where there's always that delta of, well, you're behind on hiring. And then you've got where the TA functions measure their progress and their progress to goals on offers accepted, and not on start dates, because it's the offer, right? You've got the offer accepted. The hiring managers are great. They love that the offers are accepted, but like that person's not on their team making impact that day. And so you've got misaligned goal celebration, where I will never forget the TA team was having a celebration at one of the companies I worked for, and one of the engineering managers walked by and was like, "What are you guys celebrating? I have 4 holes in my team." And it's like, but they're coming. We hired them. And he's like, great, but they're not here yet. So it was a really enlightening, unsettling, but amusing simultaneous moment. This was we had a great relationship with this hiring manager. And it was very take a step back and think about, okay, there's a reason that this planning process isn't working, which is where a lot of my time was spent trying to figure out how to do this correctly, or as correctly as possible. I don't think there's any perfect science behind this, but I do think that there's a definitely more optimal way to do this than there is from a planning perspective. And I think that it's a really interesting journey to see what different size and stage companies actually all have very much in common when it comes to this process. There are some distinct differences, certainly, but there are some core things that are very much similar. So I think I'm rambling on your question, though, so I will take a pause here.
No, this is so great. What's funny is that it made me reflect on, again, my time at Meta. And towards the end of that, I transitioned to people analytics.
Yes.
And I just want to mention, I recall throughout the whole recruiting time to being in the people analytics, when you start talking about headcount, you see people's eyes like, oh, headcount planning, dun, dun, dun. The dread of that, isn't that funny? Because it's so important, but the process becomes so complicated. There's so much, it seems like it's always we're trying to perfect it, but it's never perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the state of things. So I love that you're taking that and actually revolutionizing to a completely different space. Like, not like it's just the same and we're going to incrementally make it work as it was before, but like for now, but we're rethinking it as a whole.
Yeah, we're really trying to look at this holistically and look at this across different functions, where you might have an organization, depending upon the stage and size, where maybe half of the company headcount wise is doing extremely well. Like, they're on track. They know how to measure and monitor. This is honestly not super common, but it's possible. I've seen it. And then you might have the other half of the company where it's a complete disaster and nobody knows how to fix it. And so it seems like it might be a minor problem because half of the company is actually like got it. The other half of the company has no really grasp around what's happening. And so you end up with really disconnected functions, which is never a good thing. You have to have the cohesiveness across teams, across functions, and across companies in order for the optimal success to be the byproduct and result.
And everything here you say, you're talking about, hey, I understand this problem. And I can tell that you are like a great problem solver. You're analytical, you're focused, and you're solving. But I'm curious, like, how did you grow to become so good at this? And actually not just become good at this, but become confident to where you're taking this now to an entrepreneurial process, right? Because I think I think a lot of people are professional and feel confident in their skills, but it takes another thing to actually go in and say, I'm going to take that and pursue something.
There's a couple of different things. That's a great question. I think one of the things is when you see what you're doing over the course of your career, like, it actually starts producing what you're expecting it to. So I'll give the example of building high performing teams and being able to appropriately measure and forecast capacity planning and production and things and knowing the team where I will fully admit that I've more than once been told that I know the folks that I manage. I know them personally too well. And actually, I would argue that I know and still keep in touch with 90% or more of the folks that I've managed throughout my career, which is that's a whole lot of people. And I do that because I actually care about these people. I want to know what's going on in their lives. I want to know how to really help optimize the team. And although it can make things like performance management conversations actually more painful as a manager, I also would argue it makes you a much more holistic and a much more genuine manager who can actually help performance if you have all of his context. And, people don't have to open up and share all the things, but like, if they want to, that's actually okay. That doesn't hurt me in any way. And once I know that and understand what the teams I'm working with are, what the goals are, and what those things look like, being able to have seen so many people on the folks and the teams that I've managed hit those things that I thought they would, or even overachieve against them in many cases, it built my confidence and trust in myself as a leader and as somebody who could with the skills that I know and with the things that I have deep subject matter expertise in, being able to really um, build and trust that confidence. And it was frankly really difficult for me to, especially earlier in my leadership journey, it was really difficult for me to have that much confidence and faith in myself. I had a fantastic direct in my first leadership role that was very quick to help build my confidence and continued to encourage me to trust myself. As still somebody I lean on when I'm having kind of a moment of self-doubt or anything. And he very quickly just pulled me aside one day and just used the phrase, just fucking own it. And I have kept that in the back of my head when I feel that kind of moment of like, do I have the faith in myself to do this? Yeah, like I do. Or I actually don't know this. I probably should talk to somebody who is an expert in whatever this particular thing is. So I think that helped build my confidence. And then the other part of this is, as I see all of the external market has definitely changed from what it was a few years ago. Outside of that, though, I do think that there was a lot of headcount planning that was not done as thoughtfully as it could have been, because I don't think anybody thought the market might switch to what it is now. And so I feel like there were some considerations that could have been taken into account to, by no means eliminate these rifts, but maybe make them less painful, maybe make them less impactful. If it was an ability to decrease these even by 20% with a tool that was more thoughtful and readily at the fingertips, that's a huge motivation behind why actually take the risk, why go out on my own and work with my co-founder and try to actually execute this thing, because it's really easy for, I think, leaders to plan within their own functions without unintentionally, no intent by any means, but without really considering the impact across the rest of the company with whatever changes they might be considering making, as well as what things like time to hire look like, and what things like negotiations and offer acceptance rates look like, and what are they going to look like. There's a lot of variability across these things that I think it's misunderstood that recruiting is as simple as posting a rec, waiting for an applicant to come in, picking one, telling them that they got the job and offering them money. Like that's a very, very, very naive way to view what talent acquisition actually does. Does that happen in some cases? Sure. But I think, feel free to disagree with me here, but that's certainly not what I've seen the majority of my career.
No, that's very true. For my career, I think there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes, and things take longer, right? And then to your point, I think what I hear the most is that it's hard to also kind of align the strategy from like the ground up, right? Because people have hiring demands from the bottom, and then like how do you make sure that planning is intentional from the bottom up? Right. So that way, again, like the needs that are on the ground actually align with what the company needs, and vice versa. So again, we're not going to this over hiring spree, and then at the end of the day or time, we find that actually don't need all this talent, and it's a bit too late around that. Could you? I know the company is in stealth mode a little right now, but could you share a little bit? How do you see your work changing, like this issue? Like, how do people work with you? If you can share anything, if not, that's okay. We'll move on.
So I think what I think is really a kind of, I'll be very intentionally evasive about this, just given how stealth mode we are. But I do think that what we're building will look at the entirety of the headcount planning process holistically. And it will not be a plug and play solution for this type of company, this type of leader, and this type of space only. There will be a lot of variability of options of how to actually try to compile this information together to understand and to look at this thoughtfully and empower leaders, founders, to actually make some data-driven decisions with both the retro data, the forecasting data, and the current state.
I'm really excited about that. I think that now more never, as companies are now recovering, having my little one get out of the room. As companies are now recovering from the situation, it seems like hiring is actually picking up. I'm hopeful that there will be some learnings. I'm hoping that with you sharing this and promoting your work, people will pay attention and some improvements happen because it's very much necessary, right, to avoid a lot of the suffering and the challenges that are happening right now. If
Yeah.
you don't mind me talking about challenges on a different
Yeah.
perspective, what has your entrepreneurial journey been like? What have been some of the biggest challenges or maybe some of the biggest wins you've found so far?
Yeah, interesting. So I think for me, I I had a lot of this in my head, and being able to have some live conversations around it, being able to really just sit and talk with Mike and like talk through what I'm thinking and what this looks like on paper, and having those conversations really helped take this from ideation to like we can actually build something with this right now. As you know, maybe it's not the most complex engineering build by any means, but with what the intent of what to show and what's important and what goes into this tool and this platform. I think that's been interesting. It's been really it's been very different in some ways from having, the team and the structure. There's a lot of randomness that can get pulled, and so being able to be really really overly committed to like, I set this time block to do this thing and I'm going to do this thing. And the time management's extremely important. Getting feedback has been extremely helpful from, potential customers or people who may know the space. And so all of those things have been interesting, but I think that the journey itself is very much, it's every day is a bit of a learning thing where, this is new, something that we're doing that I believe we're more than capable of doing, but we're also learning things that we didn't know.
I love it. And would you have any advice for anybody who's maybe, hey, I have this vision, or I'm not sure. I think a lot of us were like, I want to do something of my own. I feel like I can do something more. Was there a point where you had that, and like, how would you give advice to somebody in maybe that similar situation, or even somebody who's like, I'm just starting as an entrepreneur. What have you learned that I can use? I think you talked about time management, the network. Anything else? Any tips, practical tips we can share?
Yeah. I think the other part of this outside of the network is be super receptive to feedback. Like in fact, now you don't need to, but you don't want to be defensive when someone's giving you feedback. Like if someone's taking the time to give you feedback about the vision, the product, or they're poking holes in it, they're actually taking the time to help you. And that doesn't negate the beauty or power of your idea. It might iterate it to something slightly different, but also you have to believe in the vision of what you have in mind. Like, don't let someone give you such feedback that it completely changes what the vision is, but also don't be so overly attached to that vision that you're not willing to listen to the feedback of someone who's maybe trying to actually give you throw you a hand here.
I think what you mentioned earlier about having the connections with people reminded me and ties into this about the difference between kind and nice, where when we're being nice, that's actually self-serving. We feel good about it. We're like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I told them a nice thing. When we're being kind, we're focused on the other person and
Yeah.
helping them grow. So you can say something kind that's going to be realistic and saying, I want this to improve. And it may not be comfortable, but it's you having that kind intention of the other person growing versus nice. Like, well, I'll tell you, this looks great. Julie, this was awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a lot easier to do for yourself, and it maybe feels easy, but it's not giving the impact. So I love what you're saying. Like, we need to appreciate when people are being kind to us, even if the feedback is not maybe easy,
Yep.
because it's that intention that they want us to grow. And it's actually harder to do that than just being nice. But
Yeah.
to your point, also stand your ground, right? Find the mission that drives you, and also find like, well, I appreciate this, but I'm still going to keep it because this really is what it is inside me.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't think that, um, I think someone can probably throw together a business and, do moderately well and succeed for something that they're not deeply connected to or don't deeply see a problem in. But I don't imagine, and I have not seen a lot of people who are not deeply passionate about the problem they're trying to solve really thrive. And like because they're not dealing in their passions. And so like, and that's the other component of this is I also admittedly have the luxury of taking this risk because, I've been able to do so, and not everyone has that ability. And so like there are, not to be naive there, like this is definitely a luxury and a gamble that, my husband and I decided that like this actually is a legitimate problem. This is something that we want to take a step back and bank on, even if that means there's a little bit of volatility in our lives for a bit. But, again, I have that luxury and recognizing that there are a multitude of folks who can't take that step in that journey, and they can find potentially other ways, but it might just be a different path. And there are so many different paths to get to where you want to dream to get to. But I would argue that the straight line path is probably the least common one.
Absolutely. And I think when I joined Meta, I was like, well, someday I want to do something of my own. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to work at a company and eventually I will find it. And it took them kicking me out for me to pursue this. But at the same time, I realized I'm ready. And so if anybody's listening and you're also thinking, I want to do something and I'm going to work for a company and learn a lot, I think there's value in that too.
Yeah.
You can go, and as long as you're really focusing on learning and you're embracing new opportunities and find that at the end of that track, you will find something. Maybe it is another company, it's going back, but then you will find something that does spark your interest and passion enough to where you can make it your own if you want to. And you can even do it while you're working, right?
Yep.
You can start something, start networking, start building an idea, start a blog, start a podcast, whatever it is. I wish I did that earlier. But that's my other message is you don't have to be an entrepreneur right away. It could be a learning path towards that professional growth within an organization. And then maybe you get kicked out and find that you're ready, or maybe you're doing it earlier and you build that even earlier on while you are working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we might be going through a journey or an experience that is not ideal. Maybe it's not our ideal job, not our ideal company, not our ideal manager. I'm sure everybody has worked for a manager that is not their particular favorite. I think it's really, really helpful to always take a step back and think, from every manager you have, from every job you have, and from every company that you work for, there's something that you've learned that's helpful from every single one of those people, those companies, and those jobs. There's something. That doesn't mean that you have to take away that you loved that manager because they taught you that one really good skill. You can still not have them be your favorite leader, but maybe they taught you something super valuable. And like there is a moment where it's important to separate the personal, maybe less than ideal sentiments towards those jobs, people, companies, and to think, okay, what did I take away from this? Because there's something you can take away from everything. You have to want to, though. You have to look for it sometimes, but there is always something to take away.
Absolutely. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, well, their managers, honestly, I had a really amazing manager. So thank you all managers if you're listening to this. But there might be a few where like, hey, I wish I would do things differently. So in those situations, if you don't like a management style, you can also learn about what not to do in your own personal take of that. So there's always that learning framework. And I know one thing that you're also passionate about is empowering leadership. Can you, I know that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but I'd love to know what that means to you.
Empowering leadership. Yeah. So it means a few things to me, but primarily, I think my job as a leader is to empower others, not to empower myself. And so I'm a big proponent of anybody who actually is looking for a leadership title to simply be a manager. Like they may not like what's on the other side of that title because there's a lot of thought that goes into leadership. There's a lot of messy, gray area, subjective performance measurements against managers outside of simply as a team hitting its goal. There's a lot of other things that go into it. And if I look at a team and I have somehow facilitated an environment where I have empowered the folks that are in my worlds to become a better version of themselves, whether they improved a skill, they improved at collaboration, they increased an actual, data-driven skill set, maybe their acceptance rate, whatever it is. If I have somehow supported that, that's how I view my own success in leadership. It is did I do something to empower others to become who they can be? And did I create an environment that allowed them to bring out the best in themselves? Those are the things that I think are really critical to leading successfully and, frankly, building the teams that are cohesive enough to hit the goals that can sometimes be nearly impossible to hit.
Absolutely. And I think that you mentioned a point about being also a role model in that process, because a lot of times, even when we don't say something or leaders don't say something to us, we look at their example and what they do and we follow that. And if you don't mind me pivoting a little bit, one thing that I really see you do as a good example is just observation, because we've been Facebook friends for a while. I see how fully you live your life with your family, right? You're always celebrating. And I think that's so beautiful. But I can see it also being very difficult to balance like professional life and all the things of your family. And can you talk a little more what helps you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of things. One is, I'm extremely lucky that I have a very supportive partner, and he and I very much share the the work world. We share the work at home, and we both have careers that we are committed to, and we agreed a long time ago to keep it that way. And so we had those expectations set, before we had kids. I think that we are also very intentional about making sure that we have the same aligned goals, and that, that if one of our kids is sick, one of us is going to stay home, and we look through calendars. And I will say that COVID years were, when we were all home, were a bit of a nightmare. And just because it was very hard to navigate, and that's certainly not unique to us. But what I also do believe deeply is there's actually an article about this morning. I think Deborah Liu from Ancestry, she wrote a really interesting LinkedIn post about kind of the delta of the wage gap in a mom versus a dad a couple of years before, and I think a year after having children, and how that wage gap gets pretty significantly different in that time frame. And actually a dad's tends to go up, whereas a mom's tends to stagnate and go down. And I do think that there's definitely some societal unconscious bias where it's like, oh, well, she's got kids. I do remember, longer ago than I care to admit, I had a leader at a company I worked for tell me to take the picture of my kids off my desk because I'd be treated differently. And I was in a team of mostly similar age, but mostly single, almost entirely childless. And it was an unconscious assumption that I would be less dedicated to my work. And so there's definitely been some challenges along the way, but because of experiences like that I had, I kind of was hell bent on making it clear that wasn't a thing. And that it's not that I'm putting my work over my family. It's that it is more than possible to actually have a professional, successful career and grow in your career while also raising children who don't feel like you're constantly putting your career over them. And there's not an easy way for me to respond to, there's no scientific method to how to do this correctly. We are very fortunate that we have a wonderful support system. We also try to talk to our kids about our work worlds where they know what's going on. They have some level, age appropriate level understanding of, hey, tomorrow's going to be a really rough work day for me. But I'm going to leave early on Friday at 3 so that, we can go hit the lake together. And having that open dialogue with my kids is really powerful because they know what's going on and they also can hear the problem solving and the balance. And does that mean we always get it right? Absolutely not. Like there are times where we mess this up for sure, but we really try to focus on that. The other thing is setting that example for the folks that I manage, where I have told every team I've ever led family first, but I did have a conversation with somebody a few years back who said, I know you said it and I know you wrote it in our welcome packets, but I didn't actually think you meant it because they came from an environment where that was not the case. And she said, I see it though. I see you doing it. Like, it makes me feel less scared to tell you that I need to take today to work from home because my kid is sick. And I think that there is an obligation that leaders have to set that, like, you can do this. It's not easy, but you can. And it's also really important when you're looking at, if you're looking at companies and jobs, is it simply a lip service at their family first, or do they actually mean it? Like, what does it actually mean? Because if the company means it, if they truly set that example, if the leaders lead by it, nobody's going to think twice about you saying you have to take that day. You might have a handful of leaders who maybe need some coaching and some unconscious bias training, who are maybe not representing what the company wants. But if the company culture is such that it empowers that, you have a lot more abilities to do so, and really set that tone and maintain it and really set that example. I do think there are companies who say that they mean it, but they don't. And they either don't understand because they're just genuinely not unaware, or they just don't care. And I would hesitate, frankly, like, those companies are not places that I would encourage folks who are trying to find this balance to work.
Absolutely. And to add to that, I think that moms, and again, obviously very biased around this, have such a difficult spot, right? No matter what you do, you're not perfect, right?
Yeah.
If you're working too much. If you're not working, you're not working too much. And
Yeah.
there's always like, well, you have to be this and this and this. And I think it's all BS. Like, every mom is doing her best for the most part, like 99.9%. Like, and everybody is failing and trying and loving their children, and we're all doing our best. Like, why are we giving everybody a hard time? Like, moms already have a hard time and they're just trying to put it together. And for me, I was lucky. It met up, at least for my experience, like, it was very open. Like, I could have the kids on the call, and anybody who's on call network with me probably sees the kids too. And I'm very normal with that. And I want to keep normalizing that and not shy away, because I hope that gives other people the courage to say, like, I can do that too. I can be a mom. I can show my kids. It doesn't change my capabilities, right?
Right.
And so my message is like, stop giving moms crap. If you're a mom, you are capable of so much. Don't
Yeah.
compare yourself to anybody else. Like, you're doing a great job today. If you took a shower, and if you didn't, you did a great job.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
you literally put up with shit. So
Yeah.
give
Being a mom is hard.
yourself some grace.
For sure. Being a mom is hard. I think being a working mom is hard. I will say that I think I have seen, just to really, like, kind of turn this around in a weird way, I have also seen where, not in my personal scenario, but I have seen instances where people have assumed that the dad can stay late because mom must go get the kids. And that's also not reasonable. Like, parenting takes parenting. And I've seen scenarios in which dads have actually kind of been assumed to be able to do more, and they're having a hard time speaking up because they're like, I actually can't. I need to get home in time for bedtime. I need to go do these things. And again, not in my personal scenario. We're very, very fortunate, but I have certainly seen and heard of this happening. And that also makes me sad, because that isn't even the imbalance of the partnership at home. That's the societal imbalance. And, like, empowering parents as a whole needs to be the thing, because if you empower the balance of the parents, whether it's whatever the family scenario dynamic is, if you empower that balance societally and from a company standpoint, you actually get a lot more balance and a lot more beautiful execution, both at home and in the working world. But again, that goes back to, you have to take a step back and think about that very holistically, because no matter how many times I would have shared with schools, for example, that I was traveling and my husband was a primary point of contact because I was out of the state or out of the country in some cases where I could not get my children. No matter how many ways I went about this, there have been instances where I have been the first phone call. And it's not because my husband didn't know he was the primary. It's because that's the societal assumption of, I got to call mom. It's like, mom is not there. Mom will be there emotionally, but mom is physically not there, but they have another parent that is right there who knows that they're the primary person to call in the case of an injury where, unfortunately my son was fine, but this did happen with him where he got injured and they called me and I was sitting in Texas. Like, how do you want me to fix this? Like, can you please call my husband, his father? I told you he was a primary this week. There is definitely a societal, just a presumption that I know exists, and we work to be more open-minded and flexible around this, I think, as a group of humans, but it's certainly taking its time.
One thing that reminded me of is actually just the other day I had a conversation with my husband about how it's common to network or even do group time at happy hours, right? And so if you're a parent, it's harder to go out to happy hours after your workday because you also have your children, and maybe you don't want to drink and stay late because you also have those responsibilities. So it's a very important topic. Like, there's different ways where that could be challenging, right? Where if you're not a parent, like, well, why wouldn't you go to happy hour? But really, if the parent goes, then the other parent has to stay there, right, and be by themselves for that time. So I look forward to us sharing these topics, to help all parents feel like empowered, and there's other people, and it's an important topic that we should talk about, right? And think about, well, how do we create situations that help, and not just parents, right? Everybody has their own unique struggles. I don't want to downplay that, but just for parents who are listening, like, I see this, and I think it's important to share, like, what are other ways we can build community? What are other ways can we engage? Like, go beyond just happy hours for constant networking. Like, be inclusive. If you're a leader listening, is how can you be inclusive of other people, so that way we can account for ways to support them in their unique environments, right? And not just be stagnant.
Yeah, I think there's a definite opportunity to create a different approach to collaboration and networking. And again, like, I'm a big believer in team cohesion because team cohesion tends to produce high performing teams. And, sure, happy hours are great and fun. That said, like, they're not the most inclusive way, because you've got folks who, maybe they have no kids, but they're caring for an elderly parent, or maybe they have social anxiety and it's really hard for them to be around. Maybe they are 4 months sober and they don't want to share that with everybody. There's a lot of reasons that things like after hour happy hours can be really unintentionally slighting towards a lot of folks who are not maybe the norm of the team or the company. So I think that there's massive improvements that can be done here. And again, like, I don't think people and companies and leaders do this to be intentionally exclusive. I think it's a bit of an oversight, where I know that there's a number of folks in the DEI community that are definitely looking at ways to be more thoughtful around how to do this.
Can I just add one last point on this? And then I have another question. One thing I was thinking about when we talk about mompreneurs is that it's hard, and I want to jump in that in the moment. But the beauty, I think, for our kids is that they do get to see examples, mompreneurs or parents, like, that they can do more, right? When you see your parent and they're not just saying, like, hey, follow the convention, but you're giving them permission to say, hey, look at me. It's going to be hard and I'm going to do my best. Maybe I won't always be the ideal parent, but I want to inspire you to also overcome those challenges. I want to be an example of somebody who is going to do something, work really hard, overcome it, so that you can also pursue that journey and make that in your realm like very much a natural thing to do.
Yeah.
So I love that even though we're working hard, I hope that there's this thought like, hey, actually, this is a really healthy thing to show our children or people even around us, right? Other people's children. See, like, that's what adults can do, is they can grow, they can challenge themselves, they can fail, and that gives them permission to also go through that journey.
Yeah, actually, what's funny, when we first started creating Traiga, I was going through the, naming of the company. And I will tell you, I had so much fun going through a name discussion with my daughter and a couple of her friends, because they had, there was no stake for them. They actually wanted to have the conversation. They seemed to really enjoy being a part of it. They wanted to know kind of at a high level what the thing did. And I found it really personally empowering. I mean, a little bit selfishly, honestly, that wasn't my intent, but afterwards I'm like, I feel good. Oh, that wasn't why I had this conversation. But I also feel like they were interested. Like, they actually felt like they got to have a conversation about something that they don't usually get to have a conversation about. And, we're talking about preteen girls that are, um, there's a lot going on, but sometimes, they're bored or there's really shallow stuff that they're talking about. And it was so fun for me to hear how thoughtful these conversations were about how to spell and what about this. And while have you heard, like, think about how this name might be manipulated. And it was actually really fun bringing them along for that ride. And, they're preteen girls. They're not sitting with me every day, but I also try really hard to, my son is younger, so I'll get, some interaction with him around the company, but my daughter she's older and is a phenomenal artist and photographer. And I've gotten feedback from her where she's seeing, because we're opening what we're doing to her, and she knows we're taking this gamble to see how this goes. And she's also like, Mom, like, what are you thinking? Like, please change these graphics. Like, this looks like 1985. And I'm like, okay, honey, fine, fair enough. But she's invested, and that's really exciting. And I hope that inspires her at some point to know, like, she'll, fingers crossed this is going to go the way we're hoping it will. But even if it doesn't, these little moments, to me, they're priceless. They're invaluable. And I hope that they stay in her memory too. And there's certainly that conversation with her and her friends about the name will always stay in my mind as, like, they were so excited to have the conversation, and it was really awesome.
I love that. I love that. I love that family whole, like, vibe that this whole process changes. And if you don't mind me mentioning, one thing we talked about when we discussed doing this podcast is also there's a unique challenge for mompreneurs is when you're doing something, right? You're excited. But again, the societal question, like, well, but how are you managing your kids? Like we talked about, like, probably a lot of times men don't usually get that question.
Yeah.
Like there's this assumption, like if you're a mompreneur, then somehow you're like making a conscious decision to downgrade your mom game. And people want to know what you think about that, right? And it's not, I think that there's no ill intent, right? But those questions subconsciously come up. I'm curious, like, what would you, like, how do you approach that? And what would you give in terms of advice for people who are engaging moms on one hand and who are mompreneurs who are jumping into this space, and how to kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. One, for sure, I think that there's a lot of scrutiny on this, and I think there are there's few female entrepreneurs, and even fewer that are moms. And so I think it's really important to, if someone is interested in helping change that, and there's something they feel passionate about, like, go for it. Like, don't wait for somebody else's permission, because it's not a large percentage of people right now. It's a very, very small one. Outside of that, though, I think there's a couple of things around the people who are kind of maybe asking those questions, but unintentionally, depending upon who this is, like, there's a balance between, maybe do they need to be educated, or is this just consider the source and they just don't understand? And, like, it's not personal. They don't mean anything by it. But also, even if you explained, like, would it matter? The other thing is also to make sure that, like, you have a tribe that you surround yourself with, that those comments and those voices can get to people, I think. And in that, the fleeting moments of self-doubt, it's really important to have that tribe that can, like, bring you back to where you're like, no, like, you got this. Ignore those voices in your head, because they're just putting doubt in your head. And it's really, really, really important to have people who you trust in that tribe, who you can lean on, who are from different places. Maybe one is in your personal life. Maybe one is in your professional life. Maybe one is your spiritual or familial community. Who knows what it is? But I think that when you have those different people in your tribes that you can lean on, as opposed to they're all from home or they're all from work, you're going to get more faith in that. Like, we shouldn't need reassurance, but let's be honest, sometimes we all as humans do need reassurance. And if you get reassurance from people in 3 different parts of your life that, like, ignore the naysayers, it's powerful.
I love that. And Julie, I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that we did not cover that you want us to spotlight before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I'm excited to share more as we unveil more, but we're just not quite ready to do that yet. So yeah, that I don't think so though. I really, again, appreciate the invitation and the time.
Oh, my pleasure. And remind people where can they follow you? Where can they contact you? Just so, and I will sure to post all that, but we'll hear from you.
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way where I'll post a lot of things, and then we can include the Triga website. So if people want to see, it's very high level since it's a deep stealth mode, but for general information, it is certainly up in there.
I love that. And again, if you're listening to this, I hope you're feeling like, whoa, like look at somebody else doing this. Look at a mompreneur. Maybe some new thoughts, new ideas came up. Maybe an example of what does that caring leadership look like and how can it benefit me? Is there anything I can take away from that? So I'm sure a lot of questions are coming up. If you want to share with us any questions for Julie, please feel free to comment, share anything that you took away. We'd love to hear from you. And before we wrap up, I have 3 rapid fire questions whenever you're ready.
Go for it.
Okay. First one, what motivates me the most is
Oh, my family.
success to me is,
Fulfillment.
okay, last one. And in the positive context, going off track is,
Unplanned adventure.
okay, I love it. And as my child comes in, it's perfect timing. Well, Julie, this was awesome. I had so much fun hearing from you. I'm so excited to see what's going to be happening. I'll be sure to support you and amplify that message. But kudos to you too, pursuing your passion, doing something so impactful. And I can't wait to see the impact it's going to have on everybody around you.
Thank you so much, Anya. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. And thank you so much for listening to Right Off Track. I look forward to having you in the next episode. Until next time.